You're welcome to another interesting edition of the Economy and Politics Show, where we bring you key socioeconomic developments as they affect the households. This edition, we're looking at Nigeria's 2022 growth trajectory, addressing the rising tide of poverty. And my guest is Mr. Temitope Omosuyi, an economist with Afrinvest. Nice to have you, Temitope.
Thank you very much.
Happy new month of September 2022 to all our viewers. And before we go on this conversation, let us give you a wrap of key stories from last week. Vice President Professor Yemi Osinbajo, SAN GCON, led a delegation to the White House, United States, where he met with Vice President Kamala Harris to seek support for the $410 billion energy transition plan for Nigeria. Also last week, the federal government said it's proposing a budget with estimates totaling 19.76 trillion naira, while the deficit will hover around 11.30 trillion naira and 12.41 trillion naira in the 2023 fiscal year. The Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, made this known last week in Abuja. She decried that the government might be unable to provide for Treasury-funded capital projects next year, especially due to dwindling revenue and payment of subsidies on premium motor spirit, popularly known as petrol. So those are the interesting stories from last week. And if you're joining us, it's the Economy and Politics Show. And today, we're looking at Nigeria's 2022 growth trajectory, addressing the rising tide of poverty. So, Mr. Temitope, let's begin with, of course, the big story still fresh at the moment. Nigeria's GDP grew by 3.54%, according to the National Bureau of Statistics for second quarter 2022, an improvement from 3.11% in the first quarter of 2022. Now, according to ProShare, that is plus 5.01% growth since our recession in 2020. For you, what were the major drivers of this growth?
Right. Thank you very much for having me. It's quite interesting to know that, the Nigerian economy grew by 3.5% in the last quarter. That is the second quarter of this year, compared to 5% growth in the first quarter of the year, even though the growth, was above most analysts' expectation, because it was likely expected that the economy grew by between 2.9 to 3%.
Yeah.
And that's quite applaudable. So if you look at the breakdown of the growth, looking at it from the broadest classification of the Nigerian economy, that is oil and non-oil sector, you would observe that the non-oil sector has been the major driver of growth, went up by about 4.8%, even though it's a bit of slowdown from the 6.1% recorded in Q1. But when you look at the oil sector, it has continued to be, underwaters.
Yeah.
It declined by 11.8% from about, 26% in the first quarter of the year. So when you look down to the non-oil sector, it's actually very revealing. Before we go there, we even look at it from the other classification of the Nigerian economy, that is the three classification: agriculture, services, and industry. So it's quite clear that, agriculture and service industry have continued to be the major, engine of growth in Nigeria. If you look at industry, in fact, that category, that sector has been in recession since the second quarter of 2020. The negative performance has been quite alarming, which means if we had been able to deliver some positive growth in the industry space, by now we should be looking at growth of over 7-8%. And I will explain why that growth is actually what is desirable in Nigeria. So for the industrial sector that have not contributed well to the economy, because within the industrial space, you have four broad sectors. You have the mining and quarry, you have the manufacturing, and you have the electricity and water sewage. So for mining and quarry account for about close to 40%, I think about 40% of the economy. And this sector had been in recession for a very long time, for more than 4 to 5 quarters.
Yeah.
And it's as a result of what is happening in the oil and gas sector, because we'll be talking about how oil theft, low investment in that space have continued to drag down oil sector. And if you look at manufacturing sector, even the sector actually grew, but the growth was lower than what we saw in Q1, which is a major contributor to the industry. Manufacturing sector account for over 30% of the industrial space sector. And if you look at electricity and sewage, for instance, you and I know what's happening to electricity in Nigeria.
Yeah.
We've had this year so far, we've had over 7 times of national grid collapse. It has collapsed by more than 7 times just within how many months, which means at least you will see one month of collapse in the national grid. So that has continued to affect the electricity, the energy space. So I think by and large, the major driver of the Nigerian economy still agriculture and the services sector. For agriculture, despite the challenges in that space, we have the insecurity, but because there's always a ready market, and we are seeing the impact on food inflation. Farmers are able to pass those pressure, insecurity pressure, all that pressure on consumer. You and I must eat. We don't have a choice. So, which is why the agriculture sector is still thriving, regardless of the challenges in that space. For services sector, thankfully, ICT has been a major driver of what is happening in the ICT space, and it's as a result of the digitization of the economy. You see a lot of companies are now embracing technology so as to ensure that they are nimble, and they also achieve an efficient operating system. So we're seeing that in the services sector. We should not also ignore what is happening in the financial services sector as well. That is, we have the banking sector and insurance. So despite a bit of challenge in the financial sector as a result of increase in interest rates, which is supposed to affect the sector negatively, but we are still seeing some level of traction. As a matter of fact, the sector still grew by by over 10%. So all these factors are contributing to what is happening in the services sector. And agricultural sector, so we are seeing a bit of interest in that space, but it's quite disturbing that even though the agricultural sector grew by 1.3%, is a slowdown from over 3% that was recorded in Q2. So agriculture sector, despite the fact that it's largely primitive in Nigeria, still account for over 20% of the economy. So I think we have to begin to look at how to make industry. Let's look at the sector within the industrial space. How do we make this sector more buoyant? Because the sector has been a major drag to the Nigerian economy, declining by 2.3% and has been in recession for several months now, which means something has to be done if we want to achieve optimum growth, because I believe that Nigeria optimum growth is way above 7%, even though this was celebrated. But Nigeria optimal growth is way above 7%. And I could hinge the argument on our growth level prior to 2016. Nigeria average growth to be 20 years into 2015 was about 6%, was about 6% period. China grew by 9%. Same period, India grew by that 6%. And from 2015 till date, Nigeria had only grown by 1%. China in the same period had grown by 6%. India in the same period had grown by 5%. In fact, you already know that, yes, Nigeria is growing below potential. If the country that we're competing with before 2015, right, growing at the same level, but this country is still growing by an average of 5-6% per annum, but Nigeria is growing at 1%. You should know that the growth is suboptimum. And in fact, I did an estimation that Nigeria is far below its optimal growth by 27 trillion. So what I mean by that is, if we were to sustain the growth level prior to 2016 of economic recession, by now the Nigerian economy's real GDP should be over 100 trillion.
In terms of growth size.
Now we have just 70. You have less than 80. We have less than 80. Guys, what I'm saying, that we are performing below potential. And if we want to achieve this potential, you have to grow by an average of 8% per annum. You and I know that this year we can't even do 4% or 5%. So if we are growing from 2022, if we are growing by 8% on an average per annum, it will take Nigeria 10 years. It take us 10 years to cover for the shortfall that was recorded in 2016. That is, if we maintain the growth of 2016 up to date, it will take us the additional 10 years to cover up, and which means it's actually unrealistic, because if you look at our growth outlook, we're not even seeing any growth of 6-7% in the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay, Temitope, that's really very clear that we need to unlock the industry sector to bring out the best of our growth potentials. And you look at the Central Bank of Nigeria, development financing, interventions in health, manufacturing, electricity, and agricultural sectors, we're seeing at least stability in aggregates contributions. But electricity, manufacturing, like you've highlighted, still have challenges. Is this DF, is it still really a viable step? What other areas should we explore in bringing out the potential of growth from the industries?
I understand the fact that the central bank is trying to support, those sectors, health, manufacturing, electricity, they are trying to, and agriculture to be precise, because these sectors are very important for any economy that wants to achieve a sustainable growth. Because for you to achieve sustainable growth, you must invest in human capital. And human capital is a combination of health. People must be healthy, and people must have access to good food. There has to be food security. Food security is when people have access to the right amount of food, is affordable and in the right nutrients. So it's actually understandable. And again, all of these factors are affecting inflation. So the CBN is trying to do everything possible to bring down inflation, which are non-monetary policy approach. They are not, they are heterodox approach, right? However, there are challenges, in these sectors that are outside the purview. They are not within the scope of the central bank. For instance, if you look at the health sector, Nigerians have been complaining bitterly that doctors are leaving the country in their numbers because of, the environment is not conducive for them. An average Nigerian don't even spend on health. They don't spend on health because their health, because of their income. It's not because they don't want to spend on their health, but because they don't earn enough. As of 2019, the MBS reported that Nigerian, the total expenses on food, was over 56%. Health only accounted for just 6% of their expenses. This proportion is similar to what they spend on rent and transport and all that. So it actually shows that there's not much of interest in that space, and there's a lot of beyond what the CBN can do. We also need the support of the federal government. So I think, well, the CBN is taking the right step. However, if you need to support the sector in terms of, they will have to import equipment and all that, the CBN only support with Naira. How do you, if health practitioners have Naira and they want to import, they still have to now begin to compete for limited dollars, which is going to affect exchange rate negatively. So it's a complex, situation right there. And for the manufacturing space as well, the challenges have revolved around, FS illiquidity. So if the CBN is providing support in terms of Naira liquidity, that may not even solve their problem. In fact, it could compound problem, right? Because they are struggling with other challenges that are not within the purview of the central bank. One of them, infrastructure. How does the CBN fix infrastructure? If a manufacturer wants to take his good from Lagos to Kaduna to Kano, can you go by road? And in fact, the Kaduna Abuja rail is down because of the recent attack. So that is, that has actually affected. How will the CBN policy affect those areas? Obviously, the CBN cannot address it. And look at electricity. There's been a lot of reforms. We've seen a series of reforms in that space, despite lots of money that have been pumped into the space. Till now, till date, we are not, and more than 50% of Nigerians don't have access to electricity. They are not connected to electricity. So which means, the problem is, though financing is a challenge, but beyond financing, there are other structural problems, leadership, attitude, and people's, leaders' readiness to actually change this sector. And agriculture as well. Financing is a problem in agricultural sector because banking sector can only provide short-term funding, and the gestation period of farm produce are usually above 1 year. They need patient capital, which the city can always provide. But if you have solved their financing problem, how do you solve the problem of insecurity? How can farmers go to farm and without the fear of of being killed and all that? We know a number of farmers in the north that are now displaced. They are in IDP camp. So how does the CBN financing affect all these areas? So the CBN is trying on the one hand, but based on the point I've just explained, the challenges are more than just financing. We have other structural problems, attitude of the people, readiness of our leadership, insecurity, infrastructure that are affecting this negatively. So I think we have to look at everything holistically so that we can address those challenges, and that will definitely help us to optimize growth. Not just growth, We want an inclusive growth, growth that creates job for an average Nigerian. Because if the growth we are achieving does not create job for people, nobody eats GDP. That's what you will hear. That, well, your economy is growing by 3.5%, but people are still complaining because high cost of living is affecting people. Price of things are going up astronomically. So we don't feed on GDP. People want to be employed. People want their purchasing power to improve. People want to be healthy. So that's the point.
If I get you clear, I believe that development financing is good in its way, but from my assessment over the years, great trillions of naira put into various sectors by the CBN. But I believe, like you've rightly analyzed, we need to have synergy between the fiscal and monetary policy authorities so that all these things are reviewed and we feel the impact broadly. Without that, we are not going to achieve that optimum, like you said, that we need in terms of growth.
Yeah, yes, correct.
So let's look at the projections. For ProShare, overall GDP full year 2022, the projection is that Nigeria will achieve 3%. IMF maintains a plus 3.4% GDP good outlook for Nigeria for the year. What is your own projection as we are already in the ember months to wrap up the year? I mean, the year has been quite a fast one. I don't know what you have to say, Temitope.
All right, thank you very much. I think, Nigerian economy will grow by more than 3% this year. I'm looking at about 3.1. I'm looking at about 3.1% for the third quarter and 2.6, 2.7 for the fourth quarter. And that will give about 3.2, 3.4% growth in line with the IMF. But, like I mentioned, what we need is an optimum growth that is inclusive. And if we want to achieve that, we'll be looking at growth rate of over 6-7%. So a 3.5% growth cannot deliver the kind of sustainability, the kind of transformation that is needed by an average Nigerian. Because we talk about poverty. What people are concerned about is poverty alleviation. If they were at point X in 2021, they need to have improved in terms of their income capacity, in terms of access to opportunities, right? Inequality in terms of opportunity has reduced significantly. Those are what people are concerned about. They also want to be sure that if they buy something last year, price stability is ensured. By today, they are still going to get it at the same price or a little higher, and next year they'll be able to get it at a little higher price, not a major jump of over 20, 30, 40%. So regardless of what is happening to growth, if the growth is not inclusive, even at 4% growth, it is not applaudable and it will not be felt by an average Nigerian.
Okay. Now, you've talked about inclusive growth. What should be done now? We are less than 7 months to the election year. And between now and that election year, that's 2023 February, we need some, let's say, short-term policy approach to really stabilize the situation. You talked about jobs. You talked about the fact that purchasing power has really dropped. Incomes are squeezed. And you rightly said it, you're spending more on food than even healthcare. Healthcare is important. What should be done at this point? What should government review again from the fiscal that they can align with monetary and say, let's really salvage the situation? Because we are growing, yes, but inflation is 19.64%, affecting households. Also, we are looking at rising poverty, which is a concern, and unemployment. We hope very soon that the NBS will release our unemployment rates, because that is long overdue.
All right, thank you very much. I think that we may not really see much of the effort from both fiscal and monetary policy side from now to the end of the year. Whatever they are able to do may not really translate to the desired growth, because the approach should be non-monetary or non-fiscal or non-monetary. I'll put it that way. I look at the problem from insecurity. This is it's not about an expansionary monetary policy. Maybe the central bank should give more money to certain sectors of the economy. They've been doing that, since 2016. We've seen significant support for, different sectors of the economy. And from the fiscal side as well, you and I know that deficit is rising significantly and is a reflection of expansionary fiscal policy. That is, government is spending more. And you know what government is also going to do this year? So next year, in terms of spending, we are looking at deficits of over 12 trillion. That is massive, and that is more spending. But the point is, what is the importance of spending in sectors or infrastructure, and you know that it will be destroyed the next day? Look at rail transport. If you check the GDP performance, rail transport did significantly well last year. But because of the incident, Abuja-Kaduna train, the sector declined significantly in Q2. So we should not just ignore the impact of insecurity. No economy can grow sustainably when there's insecurity, no matter how beautiful, no matter how smart, no matter how sophisticated your policy is, no matter those policy, insecurity is a major challenge. No foreigners will want to invest in, manufacturing sector in Kaduna or Borno, and you find out that the next day your facility would have been set ablaze. You wouldn't want to do that. And it's reflecting in capital importation. You see that the capital importation number is declining significantly. In fact, we saw the capital importation number this morning. It's just about 1.5, billion. 1.5 billion. This year so far, we have received 3 billion, which means, by the end of the year, we should not expect to receive up to $6 billion. This was what we received in one quarter in 2019. One quarter. That's what we want to receive throughout this year, like in 2022. So there's a problem in the economy which has to do with insecurity. We cannot downplay the importance of insecurity. If people are not secure, they won't, no matter how much you have developed the road, people will not want to travel by road, except it is extremely important. So security is very important, and I can even take the security further to food security and energy security. You know what the lessons we have learned from the Russian-Ukraine crisis? It has explained to us that energy security is extremely important. What I mean by energy security is that people must have access to energy supply. It has to be affordable, and it must be sustainable. And food security, I mentioned earlier that people must have access to affordable food, and it must have the right nutrition. So all these factors must be addressed before we can now begin to talk about implementation of certain policy. In fact, I would even advise the government to scale down spending on certain infrastructure, because if you know that this infrastructure will be destroyed or will be made attractive by insecurity, why should you go ahead? And if the central bank as well, if you know that certain areas in Nigeria, if you support the agriculture in that area, farmers, they won't be able to go to farm. So money cannot solve this problem. We have to address insecurity, speak to leaders in those areas, and bring insecurity to book. We have to address it. Otherwise, no amount of fiscal policy, no amount of expansionary monetary policy will revive the Nigerian economy and put it on a sustainable growth path.
Okay, Temitope, let's give you just 30 seconds. The budgeting process has begun, like we read in the story from last week. The Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning made representations of the MTF to House of Reps. A lot of things are happening. But what specific sectors you've talked about? Now, let's begin to achieve optimum growth. What are the specific sectors that we should give priority?
We should begin to look at beyond driving growth in the subsector, agriculture and services. We have to look at the industry sector. What is happening to manufacturing sector? What is happening to mine? How do we address the current oil theft? How do we address the challenges to manufacturers? Because our manufacturers are not globally competitive. How many of them can export what they produce and need to compete in Japan, Germany, the US? So how do we address all of that? In terms of electricity, that is also a subsector under industry. How do we address power supply? Because if you don't have power, you are powerless. Nigeria is powerless due to the absence, power supply. So I think
basically we must look at what is happening in the industry sector. Let's address problem around the FS challenges. It's also important to address infrastructure alongside the insecurity I mentioned, because no economy can grow without, significant investment in infrastructure. I understand that, yes, it could increase government debt, but once you have good infrastructure, it increases potential of private sector to generate revenue and profitability. And that means government, income will also go up in the long run if we're able to spend, money in the right sector, that is infrastructure, and this infrastructure are adding to the economy. So I think those areas are very, very critical to the development and growth of the Nigerian economy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Temitope Omosuyi, economist with Afrinvest, for the clear insights. It's time for us to put everything and unlock the potentials of the industries with manufacturing, mining and quarry, electricity, so that we can achieve optimum growth as a country and thereby address the rising tide of poverty. Thank you once again for the time.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And that'll be all for this edition of the Economy and Politics Show. You can follow our social media platforms to get updates on developments in the socio-economic space, and visit our website www.proshare.co to read our latest news stories, articles, reports, and watch our video. Just to let our viewers know, ProShare, having understood the challenges in the country and identifying with the pain points of crude oil theft, which is really depleting our revenue opportunities and even being the major source of our foreign exchange, we'll be bringing out a report on crude oil theft. It's a report you don't want to miss out on. So we'll just keep you abreast on it, but just watch out for that report. Comprehensive one looking at the whole issues that have really affected our nation's capacity to earn, from the oil and gas industry, even when we've signed into law the Petroleum Industry Act, from the issues of pipeline vandalism to activities in crude oil theft and how this affects our entire economy. That report is one that you don't want to miss out on, and it's coming very soon. So just keep following us as we give you updates on this. Till we come your way again, thank you for watching and have a lovely day.